Hello 8th grade Grizzlies, this is Miss Brown and this is going to be a review for your carbon cycle and plate tectonics test. So I'm going to walk through the entire review sheet and give you all the answers, and I'm also going to do another video which is going to be a brain dump of the carbon cycle that you might want to do before you start your test on Wednesday. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we started this unit talking about plate tectonics and we started with continental drift, and then we went into plate tectonics. So we started with continental drift, and there was a man named Alfred Wegener that developed the theory of continental drift. And there were 4 pieces of evidence that he cited to prove his theory that the continents were one big giant landmass on Earth called Pangaea, which is pictured right here. So he had 4 pieces of evidence to prove that this existed millions and millions of years ago. Okay, so we're going to go through those. So the first piece of evidence was, I'm going to say, puzzle pieces. Okay, he noticed that the continents, so if you look at South America and Africa, the continents fit together like puzzle pieces. Okay. The second piece of evidence were similar fossils found across continents. So if you look at this picture, this fossil was found on South America and in Africa. So we're going to say fossil evidence. Okay. The next piece of evidence was, I'm going to say, glacier markings. So basically, he found evidence of glacier scratches on continents that are in a tropical region. And we all know that glaciers cannot exist in a tropical region. They have to be in a cold climate. Okay. And his last piece of evidence was excuse me, sorry about that. Okay, so we were on the last piece of evidence, and the last piece of evidence were similar landforms. So he found similar mountain ranges matched, but they matched on different continents. Okay. So those were the 4 pieces of evidence that he used to prove that the continents were all connected in one giant landmass called Pangaea. Okay, moving on. Alfred Wegener's theory of continental drift was not well accepted because he couldn't say what force could be big enough to move the continents. So the force that the force that was finally accepted that was large enough to move the continents was convection currents. Okay, so convection currents in the mantle, which is shown in this picture, these little circles. That was what was discovered that moves the continents, is the convection currents. Okay. All right, and then the next thing we talked about was plate boundaries. Okay, so I'm actually going to skip ahead, and I want you to go to this picture right here, or this page that has this diagram. I want to go through this first before I go back and answer the questions on that other page. Okay. All right, so we learned about 3 different types of plate boundaries: divergent, convergent, and transform. At a divergent boundary, they move apart. At a convergent boundary, they move towards each other. You can also have them moving towards each other with subduction. That's one plate sinking underneath the other. And then you also have a transform boundary where they slide past each other. So they can slide past like this, or you might see arrows like this. Okay? So each type of boundary forms a different, or makes a different landform. Okay? So we're going to go through each boundary and the type of crust and the feature that you get. All right? So for continent, I'm going to use green. And for ocean, I'm going to use blue. All right? Okay, we'll start with divergent boundary. That's where two ocean plates or two land plates can move away from each other. So if two ocean plates move away from each other, what happens is those plates move away. And this is red for lava. When they move apart, that lava or magma that is in, I'm going to say magma because when it's out of the volcano, it's magma. I mean, it's lava. I'm sorry. When it comes out of the volcano, it's lava. When it's in the earth, it's magma. Okay? So that magma comes up and it hardens, and it makes what you call a mid-ocean ridge. Okay? And an example is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Okay, and the country of Iceland is actually a mid-ocean ridge. Okay. All right, if you have two land plates that move away from each other, okay, you get something called a rift valley or a valley. Okay, so those land plates pull apart and you just get this valley. Okay, and an example is the Great African Rift. Okay. All right, now when you have convergent boundary, you have three different types of crust. You can have ocean to continent, ocean to ocean, and continent to continent. All right? So we're going to start with ocean to continent. The ocean plate is more dense. Okay? Remember, oceanic crust is more dense than continental crust. So it's going to subduct or sink underneath the continental plate. Okay? So what you get when this happens is a volcano but it's really a volcanic island. Okay, so what happens is that ocean crust sinks and it melts and it makes a crack, and what you get is, see if I can draw. Okay, so you get okay, Grizzlies, let me back up. I got a little bit ahead of myself. Okay, let me go back. I got ahead of myself. I apologize. All right, when you have ocean to continent, you get a volcano. Okay, so I'm going to wipe this out. And what I say is you get a volcano on the land. Okay, and a real life example is the Andes Mountains. Okay, my apologies. Now, when you have ocean to ocean, the denser ocean plate is going to sink underneath the other, and this is where you get a volcanic island, or what I say is a volcano in the water. Okay. And an example of that is the Hawaiian Islands. Okay, so let me go over that again, because like I said, I got ahead of myself and I apologize. So ocean to continent, the ocean plate is going to sink. You're going to get a volcano on the land. If you have ocean to ocean crust, one ocean crust is going to sink underneath the other. You're going to get a volcanic island or a volcano in the water. Okay, now that I corrected that, if we have continent to continent, you just get a mountain. And you could do the Himalayan mountains as a real life example. Okay. And then at a transform boundary, the only one we talked about was continent to continent. Okay, so that's where they slide past each other. And you get a fault. And this is the one that causes earthquakes. Well, they all cause earthquakes, but transform boundary is more commonly associated with earthquakes. And of course, you have the San Andreas Fault in California. Okay, this would be a really good brain dump, ladies and gentlemen, to do before your test. Maybe not necessarily the real life examples, but if you go through and just write this part out right here, like just ask for a scratch piece of paper and write this out. That way you'll have that to refer to during the test, okay? All right, so what I'm going to do is set this aside, and I'm going to go back to this sheet right here. So I'm going to go back to the first page. Okay. Okay, so we're using this map over here to answer questions. So it says, what type of boundary occurs between the South American plate and the African plate? Okay. Let's see if I can zoom in. Okay. So you have the South American plate right here. And you have the African plate right here. Okay, so it wants to know what type of boundary. Well, you can look at the arrows. That is a divergent boundary. Okay, that's where they move apart. Okay. Next question, what type of boundary occurs between the Nazca plate and the South American plate? All right, so we're going to find the Nazca plate right here and the South American plate. Well, you can see the South American plate is going this way, the Nazca is going this way, so that is convergent. And that's where they move towards each other. All right, next question. It says a chain of volcanoes exists along the parts of the west coast of North America. So this talking about these chain of volcanoes right here. It wants to know what process formed these volcanoes. That process is called subduction. That's where you have one plate sinking underneath the other. So let's write that, subduction. That's where one tectonic plate sinks under the other. Oops, I'm sorry. Let me pull that up. Okay. All right. So moving on. Okay. So this is the last little bit of the plate tectonics review, and then we'll go into the carbon cycle. All right. So during the process of subduction, the question is asking what happens to the plate that sinks underneath the other. Well, you have this picture over here. You have one plate sinking underneath the other. This plate melts. Okay, and it goes back in. It goes back into the mantle, and that can form, your volcanoes or volcanic islands. So we're going to say it melts by heat and pressure. Okay. All right, so that's the first part of the review on the plate tectonics. So I'm going to pause for just a second, and we're going to go into a review of the carbon cycle. All right, Grizzlies, let's move on. So now we're going to go over the carbon cycle, and I'm actually going to do a separate video with a brain dump for that, but for the sake of doing this review sheet, I'm going to go ahead and go over the rest of the review sheet, and then there'll be a separate video on the carbon cycle. Okay, so here is the carbon cycle. So we're talking about, and this diagram is talking about different processes that put CO2 or carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, or back into the atmosphere, or into the soil. Okay, so we're going to start over here with fossil fuels. So when fossil fuels are burned, that puts carbon in the atmosphere. Okay, when plants let me back up. I'm going to start with animals. I'm going to go with animals, then I'll do this next. Okay, so animals, and I'm going to put humans here. When we exhale carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere through respiration. Okay, so we exhale CO2. So whenever we talk, exhale, CO2 goes back into the atmosphere. Okay. Okay. And then another way, all right, so let me go over here next. I'm trying to do this in an order that does not confuse y'all. Okay, so ways that a CO2 is taken out of the atmosphere. So this puts it in. This is a way that CO2 is taken out, and that's through photosynthesis. Okay, so when plants undergo photosynthesis, they take carbon dioxide out of the air, and it goes into the plant, and then along with water and sunlight, photosynthesis occurs. Okay. Also, when a plant dies, it puts CO2 back into the soil. And also, when an animal dies, it puts CO2 back into the soil. Okay. And then also, if animals eat plants, that's another way that CO2 is taken out of the atmosphere. Okay, so this takes it out, and this puts it back in. Okay. And like I said, I'll do a separate brain dump on this. Okay, onward. So much of Earth's carbon is stored underground in the crust. Above the crust, what holds the most carbon? And we talked about that, and that is the oceans. Okay, so the oceans can absorb very large amounts of carbon dioxide. Okay, some carbon leaves the atmosphere and is transferred to different spheres of Earth. To which of these places can carbon be transferred directly into the atmosphere? And you'll have two answers. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, some of these are directly off your test. So make sure you write these answers down, okay? So it's asking what are the two ways carbon can be transferred directly into the atmosphere. Okay, so basically very quickly. So we have plants and ocean water. Those are your two answers for that one. All right, onward. We're almost done. All right, next question says, which of the following scenarios is likely to occur if ocean temperatures continue to rise? So this was a warm-up question. So if ocean temperatures continue to rise, the oceans will absorb a lot of the carbon dioxide, but eventually they're going to release it back into the atmosphere. Because remember, the oceans is what holds the most amount, like we saw in this question here. Much of Earth's carbon is stored in the oceans. So if ocean temperatures continue to rise, it's going to release that CO2 back into the air. All right, next one. It says analyze the diagram showing several layers of rock. As described by superposition, which rock layer is older than H? Okay, so we're looking at our diagram. It wants to know the oldest, which one is older than H. So H is right here. This is H. This is G. And this is F. And this one is E. And K is over here. And that's actually our answer. It's going to be K. All right, last couple of questions. Okay, it says, what effect do volcanic eruptions primarily have on climate? So we talked about this when we went through the notes on just naturally occurring events and that can affect the impact in the environment. So basically what happens is when those volcanoes erupt, it's going to spew a lot of dust and ash into the atmosphere. And what that does is it blocks the sun, okay? And if the sun can't get through, it can't warm the earth. So you're going to have a temporary cooling because of the release of gases and ash. So that gas and ash is going to block the sun, and it's going to cause a temporary cooling. Okay. All right, last two questions. Okay, so for example, the Gulf Stream is the current that runs through the Gulf of Mexico. So if you, so we live in Houston and we have that Gulf Stream, which is a warm current. So that and our proximity, of course, to the equator is why Houston's temperatures are overall warm. Okay. Conversely, if you live in near a cold current, so for example, the Pacific Ocean is a cold current, so that's going to affect the temperatures. So the example I always give my students is if you live near a cold current, you're going to have cooler temperatures. For example, like I said, the Pacific Ocean is a cold current. So when you go to San Francisco is right off of the Pacific Ocean. It's off the bay. So their temperatures are always cold. Now, I always give the scenario when I go to California, I stay in Sacramento in the summer, and it's always 110, 115. You drive an hour and a half to San Francisco, and it's 60 degrees because of that cold current. So if you live near a cold current, you're going to have cooler temperatures. Oh, I spelled that completely wrong. Let's try this again. You're going to have cooler temperatures overall. Okay. And then if you live near a warm current, you're going to have warmer temperatures overall. Okay, there is a question on your test that asks if you know, if you live near a warm current, how is your, you know, how would that affect your weather? And if you live near a cold current, how would that affect? So ocean currents, cold currents give you cooler temperatures, warm currents give you warmer temperatures. All right, last question. Blank blank plays a crucial role in distributing heat across Earth's surface, and that is solar radiation. And basically that comes from the sun, obviously. But on your test, hint, hint, it's going to be solar radiation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is a review for your plate tectonics and carbon cycle test. So you want to go through this review sheet. Okay. I would encourage you to do a brain dump of this before your test. Okay, and go through this review sheet. Like I said, a lot of these are questions that are straight off of your test. And you should do well if you understand everything on this review sheet. So on behalf of Miss Ford, Mr. Winter, and Miss Ludeman, this is Miss Brown. We believe in you, Grizzlies. This is your last major test for this grading period. So we want you to do well and go Grizzlies.